Are we ready?
Yep, you're good to go, Betsy.
Okay, we have a visual. Hi, and good evening. My name is Betsy Piet, pronoun she, her. I'm a managing editor with Workers' World newspaper. I'm a member of the Philadelphia branch and our party's Disability, Justice, and Rights Caucus. And it's my pleasure to host tonight's webinar, a very important webinar on support of the liberation of people with disabilities and incarcerated workers. I'd like to welcome comrades and friends to this broadcast, where hundreds of revolutionaries from across the world gather to strategize, analyze, and build a struggle for a socialist future, a workers' world. Capitalism creates a hostile environment for people with disabilities. From everyday language that reinforces the idea, that reinforces the idea that disabilities are negative, to the multitude of barriers that exist, the lack of health care, the unwillingness to listen to what disabled people need, and citing costs as being prohibited to make daily life accessible to all. Disabilities are seen as a drain on the economy, on other people, on life in general, something that gets in the way. Of course, when multi-billionaires like Jeff Bezos spend untold sums of money to go to space for 10 minutes, that's not seen as a drain on anything, except we know it means less food, healthcare, homes, jobs, and more. People with disabilities know that every day survived under capitalism is an amazing day. A difficult day, a day full of challenges of all kinds, but another day of being with friends, families, comrades, and colleagues. This hostile environment makes the effort that got the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, passed 31 years ago, even more incredible. From a 54-day sit-in in San Francisco to the famous Capitol Steps crawl, people with disabilities came out in numbers to demonstrate how difficult daily life is for disabled people. Despite that historic concession from the ruling class, enforcement means elusive, and enforcement remains elusive, and implementation of accessibility requirements is underwhelming in so many areas. Tonight, we will discuss the ADA, its importance, and what needs to be done. We'll take a look at socialist countries for the support and inroads that have been made there, for examples of what should be done here. As a matter of fact, the 88th anniversary of July 26th is also the very same date as the Battle of Moncada in 1953, that first spark of the Great Cuban Revolution. We will also discuss the nearly impossible conditions incarcerated workers face in the racist, hostile environment of the US prison system. We will hear about the struggles outside the walls to support the workers who are held captive, as well as what life is like inside the walls. But just a break. But before we get underway, take a second to go to Workers' World Facebook page, facebook.com, Workers' World Party. And we can see, you can see a way to contact us. Please make sure you follow us, that you follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, we encourage you to share your comments at Workers World on Twitter, and also on live on YouTube tonight for all of you YouTubers. So please make sure to share the live stream video on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can post on social media. So I'd like to now introduce a guest for tonight. First off is Brian Shea, he, him, with the Boston branch of Workers' World Party. He is a member of the Workers World who helped start the Disability, Justice, and Rights Caucus. Brian has been to Cuba twice, in 1990 and again in 1995, when he went as part of a hemispheric conference on disability rights hosted in Havana. My ex is an Afro-Caribbean immigrant woman, mother, warrior, a revolutionary artist, and an art entrepreneur, and a member of Workers' Will Party, community activist, griot, and writer. I'd like to start with Brian for our first question tonight. So, Brian, can you tell us who first said our caucus slogan, quote, from each according to our abilities to each according to our needs? And what does this mean to you, the disability community, and the workers and oppressed people of the US and the world? Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Comrade Betsy, and thank everyone for being here this evening with us. That slogan, that formulation was really, it was aspirational. It was written by Marx. It's the stage of communism, which with the stage of communism when when society has reached the point where when human needs can be met and there are no surpluses. Well, because there are no shortages. I'm sorry. Either artificially or other created, but what it means to us who are building for a society that's owned by working people, it is first of all, it's just the opposite of the way things are distributed in a capitalist society, which where things are commodities and are traded as commodities. Everything, including healthcare and housing, and everything needed to provide for yourself and for your family is commodified. And what it means for people with disabilities is that this is the society that we would be the full range of human beings, of the way people's bodies and people's minds and consciousnesses, whatever, negotiate the world can be accommodated, which means every the built society, which is every part of everything that humans have made, can accommodate every part of the society. And that's what that's what Marx meant when he wrote that about the communist stage of society, which at this time is still aspirational, that we as a Marxist-Leninist organization are reaching for. And how we're reaching for it is by organizing amongst the most oppressed, marginalized workers, poor people, incarcerated people. That's my answer.
Brian, okay. Brian, thank you on that. And it leads us to a lot of thoughts. Could you talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act? Why, I know you had a role, you were one of the people, I mentioned the crawl up the Capitol steps. I heard earlier today that you were one of the people doing that. And So glad to have you with us tonight, 31 years later. But can you say why the AD Act is not enough for us to achieve disabled liberation? What else do we need and how can we get it?
Well, first of all, we need to own the society. We need to own the value of, we need to own the wealth that our labor creates. We need to own the society. We need to own the resources. We need to be able to share the resources, even if, as with many disabled people, that they haven't figured out how to exploit our labor yet. And they kind of commodify us in other ways. But the struggle, I mean, the ADA is fine, it's good, and things like that, but it's ineffectual in a lot of places precisely because it's implemented within a capitalist economy and a capitalist society. What I think was more important is the struggle to get it, which was waged by people with disabilities relentlessly since you can look at legislation. You can look at legislation as snapshots in the class struggle. I mean, either whether the legislation is progressive, it's when our class and a host of other classes are winning some yardage. And when it's reactionary, it means, a time when we're getting our butts kicked. But the whole process of winning even this recognition of the bourgeois rights of people with disabilities, it was a titanic struggle that's still going on. I can leave it there.
Brian, since you were part of that struggle, can you just make a few comments about what it took?
When the struggle was going on in the heat of it in like 1988, 89, 90, there was a lot of it was a time when 1990 was the Greyhound strike, if you recall. It was a time when the Greyhound was just basically going to try to bust out its unions and stuff like that. And they were getting, the Greyhound unions had not really been that militant previously. And one of the things that had happened was the situation was driving the rank and file to put pressure on the union, the local presidents, to take action. So they basically, the local presidents basically, before they took a strike vote, some parts of, Greyhound was busting its own union, and they were going simultaneously, they were signing on to this reactionary effort to stop the ADA and stop their having to make their buses wheelchair accessible and whatnot. So some of us in the movement, some of us in the party, were invited to speak to the Greyhound presidents, the local union, to get them on record to endorse, the proposed Americans with Disabilities Act, and also to tell Greyhound management to back off of that. And that was just before they took a strike vote and they went out. So, we blocked a lot of, there's a lot of folks in wheelchairs blocking a lot of Greyhound buses.
It's so good that you're connecting the struggle of people with disabilities, fighting for justice, with the struggle of workers fighting for union rights. So
well, it's organically there.
Yeah.
Because who is disabled in this society? It's working people.
Exactly.
Either people who don't own anything but their ability to sell their labor.
Exactly.
I mean, anybody, if somebody in the family of a ruling class member ends up with a disability, their families will cover their needs.
And they have limousines.
For the vast majority,
Yeah, and they have limousines to drive them where they need. Thank you, thank you, Brian. I'm gonna call next on Maya X, and I think another area of the working class struggles is that of incarcerated workers within the U.S. prison system. And Maya, let's get you on. All right, Maya. Let me
add some community greetings.
Greetings. Maya, can I ask you, how does the U.S. prison system handle people with disabilities? And what do incarcerated workers and people with disabilities have in common? Why should disabled people support incarcerated workers?
Before I go into some points around that question, I wanted to just add something to what Comrade Shea was just speaking of. And when we talk about the elite and their access to healthcare, one of the prime examples I remember years ago is one of the Rockefeller brothers who had received, I believe, 10 or 11 heart surgeries where he got somebody's heart in order to stay alive. And so when we think about the access that the elite has and what happens to the working class people and to the incarcerated, it's really very stark. And another example is around the Congress and how they get to have their health care for the rest of their life. And we, the people, fund that. And yet they, every day on that Capitol, they debate and cut the services that the people need in order to live a better quality of life. And so I'll go into your question, Comrade. In the United States, it is estimated that there are approximately 2.4 incarcerated. And out of the 2.4 million, and out of that number, they say approximately 760,000 of the incarcerated workers are living with disabilities behind the wall. And what we see is how it interconnects. When we look and we see who are the incarcerated, And oftentimes it is the oppressed. And once I've been reading up on this topic to find out that in a system that spends almost $80 billion a year to prop up the mass incarcerated, the system of mass incarceration and all of its apparatuses, and what happens when you're disabled behind the wall, is that there is huge neglect. There is misdiagnoses. There is punishment when you require treatment. There are numerous stories that we can give examples of to see why we have to keep the struggle alive, to make sure that we don't forget that it's one class, and it's the class of the working class, and the class of our family members who are behind the wall, who literally don't get to have the level of care. And when you have a bill such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, and to see that at its first incarnation in the 30s, that it was intentional that there would be no resources for people who are incarcerated. And only through struggle and through a fight that still continues to this day, have we seen little glimpse of progression and access. And so I think that to say to your question, there's nothing good to report about how the United States imperial system treats disabled or the incarcerated. You know, we know that we're seeing it right now, even with what we've endured under this recent pandemic. And the pandemic of COVID-19 has really exposed all of the other disparities, be it in healthcare, what happens behind the wall, and what happens out here. And so that's what I think about the United States and its response to care for the incarcerated and the disabled.
We know here in Pennsylvania that around the same time that the institutions that were set up to deal and assist people who had mental disabilities were closing down, the prisons became the area where many of those people were sent. And we're here today from many of our brothers and sisters and siblings on the inside that they're still seeing the impact of that. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. Well, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, it found that people that are living with cognitive, intellectual, and developmental disabilities are very prevalent behind the wall. And it seems to be that immediately after arrest, you know, this is what the system does. And it literally strips people of their rights. And I wanted to just share something as I think about examples, right? When we think about the Black Panthers and what led the Black Panthers to make it a priority that every single chapter had to have a medical clinic, right? And in the book, Body and Soul, the Black Panther Party and the fight against medical discrimination, you see where Mr. Bobby Seale and Huey Newton and members of the Panthers really took a look at this matter as to why healthcare had to be at the top of the list, because they saw the level of racism and neglect and profit that the medical industrial complex was making. You know, it is noted that in here that the drug companies, the insurance companies, and the equipment suppliers taking huge profits from private hospitals, and that the fact remains that they initiated the free health clinic to combat the health problems which existed amongst the poor and the oppressed. And to this day, we still see that. And to this day, we even have members of the Black Panther Party who have spent decades behind the wall, who are now dealing with multiple illnesses and disabilities. And these were once our warriors on this side that were fighting for the justices and for our rights, for all of our people. And when we think about that, and that's what really stands out for me, the work that the Black Panther Party and their clinics were able to do. And again, this is a party that was definitely influenced by what was happening in socialist countries and socialism, be it Cuba, be it North Korea, be it China. And to see that, you can even look this up online, to this date, I don't think that there's been the level of extensive research on the illness known as sickle cell anemia, like what the Black Panther Party clinics were able to do, and really the strides that they made. And for that, we see that they were targeted and incarcerated and murdered. And now we have members of the same fighting organizations, and a plethora of them. We have Leonard Peltier, and so many others, Russell Maroon Schultz, Mutulu Shakur, who once used acupuncture to really help combat the opiate struggle and the drug abuse struggle of that time, drug addiction struggle of that time period in the 60s and the 70s. And these are the things that really became a threat and really exposed the healthcare disparities of this Western system here.
Thank you, Maya. I'm looking at the chat and seeing a comment from Jules. Private owned prisons for profit must go. And I would add to that private healthcare in prisons also must go. And it speaks a lot to what you're raising, Maya. I want to get back to both of our panelists, if we can have you up together on this. This is, as we mentioned earlier, this is the anniversary of July 26th, which is the Mancada in Cuba that opened the way for Cuba to become a socialist country. And if you could talk about a couple of things, the difference between how disabled people are viewed and treated in socialist countries like Cuba and China, and in the capitalist countries like the US. And I'd like both of you to comment on that. And also, talking about the a brief snapshot about the intersection of mass incarceration and the state apparatus, that continues to super exploit incarcerated workers. I think these are connected because, the state is very much a question when we look at socialism, like who controls the state in Cuba versus who controls the state in the US. So I'll go to you, Brian, and then Maya. Brian, you have to unmute.
All right. I can hear me now. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a pivotal question right there. Whose state is it? And the state has a role. They're, as they are the executive committee representing the bosses. They police us, but they also sit across the table from us when we're trying to negotiate any breathing room for our class, including things like the ADA, including things like minimum wage, including the right to organize and things like that. And I think we need to keep our eye on the fact that because we may win any one of small concessions, it's not because out of the kindness of their hearts, that this was given to us. It wasn't given to us it was taken by us.
Mhm.
And what, but I wanna, when I was in Cuba during the some of the most severe parts of the special period, which was I think it was called special period not in time of war or something like that. It was when the Soviet Union was killed and Cuba lost a lot of its trading partners, and the U.S. tightened the illegal blockade uh, by Torricelli, uh, various acts of Congress that tried to squeeze Cuba. But when I was down there at that time, there were disabled folks who were organizing each other on the, in through the social organizations, through schools and things like that, to to bring to forward into society what the specific needs of people of disabled folk in the society were, bringing it to the everywhere from the the neighborhood CDRs to the women's organization, to any other organization in Cuban society. And even though the material resources were thin and but and Cuba still being punished by the illegal blockade, there is a political priority that is set, that the first needs are that get addressed are the needs of the people and not the needs of shareholders or you know, corporate donors or anything like that.
CEOs, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Maya, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, as I was listening to Comrade Shea speak, I'm reminded of why Comandante Fidel and the Cuban people created ELAM. And ELAM is the medical school in Cuba. And it was opened on November 15th, 1999. And to take a quote from Fidel Castro, where he really says, it is the spirit of solidarity and its spirit in solidarity and integration will be so deep that it will never be erased. And to know that Cuba every single year, um, literally does so much for its people. And when we see when hurricanes happened, and even most recently, that few lives are lost because from the eldest to the youngest and even the animals, there is a plan that takes care of people. Where I don't know, I forget the year of Hurricane Katrina, but I believe it's probably almost 20 years now, maybe. Is it been that long? I might be wrong. But the people who were displaced in Hurricane Katrina, still to this day, there are parts of Louisiana that have been decimated. And that was a time that also ripped the bandages off to show you in this country, that some say is the richest country in the world. But that depends on what is your measure of rich. Is your measure of rich only about what you gain from capital, or is your measure of wealth and rich the quality of life for your people? the quality of life for the inhabitants of humanity. And that's what we see in Cuba. And just to think that, even for myself, as Comrade Bryant said, going to Cuba and having to engage their healthcare system because I had an allergic reaction, and I didn't have to sit in an emergency room for 4 to 5 hours, be asked questions about my insurance and what's covered and not covered, or what is the medical necessity. Within 5 to 10 minutes, I was being seen by Cuban medical staff, and it was assessed, and I was given care, and I was told what to do, and then I was able to leave. I wasn't given a bill. I wasn't asked any questions about money or any of that. People cared to make sure that I was feeling better. And they do that every single day since the revolution. And the way how the strides that we continue to see, that even where there are disasters in other parts of the world, when they are taking care of their citizens in Cuba, they prioritize the life of people. It's not about profit. And as Comrade Shea and myself have shared earlier, the prison industrial complex is built on profit. And once it became privatized, that was exacerbated even more. Just imagine just last week where we heard that they were saying that the people who were released from incarceration during the height of the COVID crisis, that they are going to be telling them that they must return back to prison. This is a vicious beast that we are living under. And so when I think about that, and think about Mumia Abu Jamal again, on the brink of losing his life because the system is trying to kill him by any means necessary. And if not for the movement, which includes the disability rights and justice movement and the movement around the world, Mumia and so many other political prisoners. And to quote George Jackson, if you are incarcerated, the mere fact that the system is so corrupt makes them all political prisoners. So we're not differentiating one over the other. We call for the abolishment of prisons. We call for, releasing people now and giving the resources now. When we think about this pandemic alone and how many billionaires have continued to increase their coffers, the amount of money that Mr. Jeff Bezos, who is a man that super exploits prison labor, especially since he acquired Whole Foods. And I've shared this before, that it started out in Seattle, where there was an article over a decade ago about Whole Foods using prison labor to harvest the tilapia in Seattle. And from there, we see how this has continued to evolve and grow and grow. And so even within the pandemic, where they gave the people minuscule amount of resources while stacking and packing the accounts of so many others. We sit here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm going to tell you, I know Bob Kraft, who they claim they give all this praise to because he flew to China to go and get PPPs for Boston and Massachusetts. And how much money is the Kraft Corporation making? Billions and billions and billions of dollars, while people are still suffering. And our class behind the wall is still suffering. We don't stand with his Reform Alliance around a kinder, gentler incarceration system. And when I say Reform Alliance, I'm speaking about the organization that was founded by Bob Kraft, Michael Rubin of the Philadelphia 76ers, Jay-Z,
Yeah.
Meek Mill, and others, who literally are working in tandem with the system to keep our people, still attached to the system of incarceration and still knowing the super while stacking their pockets. And so for that reason, I said, we have to continue the struggle. We have to continue the fight, because this is injustice right in our faces. When we see what is happening right now around the world, where there are countries that can't get access, that aren't allowed because of sanctions to be able to send resources, to be able to take care of their people. It's the same thing we see happening here in the United States. It's the same thing we see happening behind the walls of mass incarceration as well. Thank you.
Maya, thank you. And I just want to share some of what's been in the chat. Katrina was 16 years ago. There was a comment, I'm trying to find it here. This webinar needs to have more outreach because there's hot fire being spoken here tonight, right now. Thank you for that comment. And there are others. I want to do just, maybe if you can each kind of chime in briefly. The US is making a huge deal, and as well as their corporate allies globally, about so-called human rights issues in China and Cuba. This comes from the country, and maybe I'm answering the question by asking it, that comes from the country that has the largest percentage of its population incarcerated. Could either of you comment briefly on that? And Brian, I'll start with you, and then Maya, and just maybe try to keep your comments short. Thank you.
Well, the Chinese said it best. They said, basically, they told them, don't throw stones if you are in a glass house.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say those words, but they did say, what about your mass incarceration? What about your your homicidally racist cops? The best response came from the Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Maya?
When I think about human rights abuses, it is a human right abuse for a company named Securus, which is partly owned by the owner of the Detroit Pistons, and his name is slipping my mind at the moment, that is literally robbing the incarcerated and their families. When I think about human rights abuses, I think about Keefe Canteen, right? That literally every single thing that is needed by our loved ones behind the wall can no longer be directly sent to our loved ones. When I think about human rights abuses, I think about them trying to end physical mail, right? And the pictures and cards of our loved ones sent to our other loved ones behind the wall. So when I think about human rights abuses, I think about all of the political prisoners that are behind the wall at this moment, right? Sundiata Acoli, dear comrade of Assata Shakur, 84 years old. We must continue to fight against that human right abuse. Russell Maroon, Mumia, Leonard, Mutulu, the people in Palestine, in Gaza. When I think about human rights abuses, I think about Joe Biden approving the bombing of Somalia just last week. When I think about human rights abuses, I think about the bombs that fell across Damascus in Syria. When I think about human rights abuses, I can keep going and going and going. I think about Guantanamo Bay. I think about the torture that happens in the maximum security prisons. I think about the words from Baba Sekou Odinga and so many others. I think about, oh my goodness, just so many. So for the United States of America to even think that they can throw that stone at any other country, you know, again, the work begins here, and we
Right.
must dismantle this beast.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm seeing in the chat that Detroit Pistons owner is Tom Gore, is the prison profiteer, who is also the CEO of Securus. And just by way, anybody who might be in the Philly area, we're having a protest April or August 7th against Aramark, who is one of the companies who provides food for the prisons, and we'll share that. And I see a reminder here that 2021 is the year of political prisoners, free them all. I just want to draw, before we go on to the next part of this program, I just want to mention, plug for Workers' World newspaper, which has been in continuous circulation since 1959. We are a daily news service. If you go to workers.org, you can sign up for daily news articles. And you can sign up for articles from a revolutionary socialist perspective. Look for the yellow banner at the bottom of the page. We currently have a monthly print edition that can be delivered to your door. And you can subscribe at workers.org to receive this print edition. In every daily email and every printed issue, we cover international news, as well as news from within the US and its domestic colonies. We exchange articles with our allies in the movement, independent people's media, and socialist publications around the world. Workers' World really is an invaluable revolutionary media source. And each week we run a section of Tear Down the Walls, which is about the struggles for the abolition of the prison industrial complex, from our inside reports during the Attica Uprising in 1971 to our weekly coverage today. You can subscribe to Workers' World newspaper and Tear Down the Walls to receive it by email or postal mail at workers.org. And also, while you're there, if you want to contribute to the program we have to be able to send subscriptions to prisoners, it's a Patreon campaign, please look for that. I want to now introduce a segment of our program by Brian Arroyo. Brian Arroyo is a regular contributor to Workers' World newspaper and to the Tear Down the Wall section. Brian is currently incarcerated at Pennsylvania State Correctional Facility, Cole Township. He is sentenced to life for a crime he did not commit. Mumia Abu-Jamal dubbed him the world's first jailhouse environmentalist for leading a campaign of incarcerated workers to shut down a proposed multi-million-dollar coal gasification plant that would have endangered thousands of lives on both sides of the prison wall in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. And just a side on that, I think, one of the human rights issues right now is clearly the environment. So it really underscores Brian's contribution. In this statement, Brian talks about the systematic denial of healthcare to incarcerated workers who typically have to pay a copay every time they see a doctor, even when behind bars. Brian himself has contracted COVID-19 twice and was present for the death of his cellmate when he succumbed to the virus. So I think we're now going to bring up a message from Brian.
Tonight, there's going to be a live event on disability justice and rights, and specifically as it relates to incarcerated individuals. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, if you have a statement that you'd like to make to the people listening to that tonight.
Of course, Mr. Arroyo always has a statement. It would be unconstitutional, and it would actually be divinely impossible, as I was the gift that was made as the First Amendment embodiment into this world. That they're not basically rising up to the protocols of the CDC along with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Healthcare, and then give an overview of basically different instances and examples that, I have been in the midst of, and also am assisting those individuals with not only getting the appropriate and adequate medical health care, but also getting them connected for them to, demand that they be treated accordingly and not punitively for exercising their particular Eighth Amendment rights, which is to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, and also to be treated humanely, and with that dignity that, access to like, for example, there was a big article that came out where it said that the Secretary of Corrections was talking about that the $5 was suspended. And then what medical department started doing was, since they were getting an overflood of sick calls, since they weren't being charged and medical knew this, what they would do is totally discard the sick call slips so that they can skirt the issue of medically treating anybody, because they said, we never received it. So what guys started doing was they were using carbon copies, which I told them, get a carbon piece of paper, make a duplicate copy of your sick call slip, so whenever you get called down there, you can substantiate, look, I put in, right now, I just helped a guy today. His name is Harrison Graham, and he is trying to get off of, he had COVID and he actually died, and they resuscitated him 5 times. So he basically technically died 5 times and was resuscitated because he got COVID. Now, since then, they had him on a mechanical soft diet, and he's put in 4 request slips and 2 sick call slips to get him off of the mechanical soft diet since then. And every time that he sends one in, they ignore his sick call. And then when he puts in a request slip, they turn around and say to put in a sick call. So these are the games that are afoot, as always. And this is another way to discourage you from filing a sick call and getting the appropriate medical treatment and attention.
It's scandalous. It's scandalous.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is perverse, Ted.
Yeah.
You know?
Is that the end of the tape? Hello?
Yep, that's the end, Betsy.
Okay, thank you. And it's so good to hear Brian's comments. My partner, Joe Piet, regularly talks to Bryant, and, we get to have an interchange with him on a regular basis. And he frequently raises the issue of disabilities within the prison. So I'm glad that we were able to include his comments as part of this program. Yeah. I want to mention that the Disability Justice and Rights Caucus has a second Sunday gathering, a dialogue on the intersection and solidarity within and across the disability justice and rights movement. So join us on the second Sunday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time right now, and our virtual Zoom meetings with automatic closed captioning. You can find coverage of the last second Sunday dialogue by visiting WWP at, and I just lost my script. How do we visit that again? Hold on. I have to come out of this. At www.pub/DJRC. Okay. I'm going to ask both Brian and Maya to come back on for a Q&A.
Comrade Betsy?
Yes.
Maya. I was noticing in the chat, I believe Comrade Judy posted a link to an article on beloved Rochelle McGee.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I did not mention Rochelle's name, and Rochelle is right here on my wall. One of the longest held political prisoners, and we must also fight to bring Rochelle home. Right. And again, in the spirit of George Jackson, and Jonathan Jackson, we must bring him home. Thank you.
58 years. So I'm gonna kind of give you some audience questions, and maybe we can do some closing statements. We're approaching 9 o'clock. About a question we had about union busting and disability justice and rights, and Amazon in particular. Carmen Maya touched on Whole Foods using prison labor to harvest fish. Can you talk about why attacks on workers trying to unionize is also an attack on disabled workers? And the second question we have is about the updates on Mumia Abu Jamal's health. So Maya, I'll go to you first, and Brian, if you want to chime in, and then if you have closing comments you both want to make, let's do that.
I extend a full salute again to the brave and courageous organizers in Bessemer, Alabama, and for their, work that they have started. It reminded me again of the quote of the women of SWAPO, you've touched a rock, you've dislodged a boulder, and they're organizing is dislodging a boulder. And now it's time to keep that progression going. The arrogance of Jeff Bezos the other day as he came back down from space, wherever he went, to say he wanted to thank the Amazon workers for making this possible. It just kind of like adds insult to injury, and to see that this is happening carte blanche, and how important it is that we continue to be in solidarity. One of the things I got to learn, and I believe this started around with Goodwill, and the wages that the disabled workers at Goodwill were hardly being paid anything. And I just remember, for those of us who like to go to the thrift store, and I remember in Boston, the comrades had organized a demonstration to go to Goodwill. And at that time, we had Pam Africa here in Boston, who also is a connoisseur of the thrift markets. And to say, at the drop, no matter what, we're able to stop and go and organize and defend and raise our voices, and really to make the connections, because so many of our movements is in silos, and remember a time with the height of the foreclosure crisis of 2008, when we used to march on Countrywide that, was taking away people's homes, and then make that connection to the prison that was just a couple blocks away, and then also bring it to the supermarkets and the utilities, because now we're seeing with the pandemic, again, what is happening with our class. Within 24 to 48 hours, millions of people are at risk for being facing evictions if the federal moratorium is not, held. And we see how that's going to impact our class behind the wall even more as these things unravel. But I'm just going to end there and just say solidarity is one of our most potent weapons in this arena. When Dr. King started to make the connections to what was happening in Vietnam, what was happening to the sanitation workers, what was happening with the farm workers and Cesar Chavez, this is when imperialism started to really tremble in their boots and really tried to dismantle, disrupt, and assassinate the movement. But as Chairman Fred Hampton once said, you can kill the revolutionary, but you will never, ever kill the revolution. And we say the same here. You will never, ever stop the movement until we get what our name says, disability rights and justice for all of our class. And our class includes the incarcerated workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Brian, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, I just want to add another kind of historical note why the Black Panther Party is and has been such an integral part of the disability justice struggle. When I was first coming in to any kind of politics, I was working in disability stuff. What we were told, what I was told was the story of the role of what was left of the Black Panther Party in Oakland in 1977. This was after COINTELPRO had decimated the BPP as an organization, and what the party had left in Oakland. They not only participated in the sit-in in San Francisco at the what was called the Health, Education, and Welfare Building for 28 days, along with other disability rights at that time activists, to force the Carter administration to sign enacting regulations for the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That was one of the longest occupations of a federal building that since, I think it was not as long as the occupation of Alcatraz, but it was besides that, the longest occupation of a federal building. I mean, there was one Panther cadre who took part in the occupation, a comrade by the name of Brad Lomax, and the Panther branch also aided in getting food and supplies into the occupation and getting information out. And so it was, tremendous acts of solidarity, with, across, proletarian struggles. And we can and will start doing that again when we will help with the Amazon workers when they start to organize again. There will be disabled folks out there organizing support and organizing workers' councils and workers' supports whenever that is necessary. And thank you all very much for this was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I just want to respond on the question about Mamiya's healthcare. The problem, Mamiya, I think as many people know, had heart surgery, this spring. But being in prison, given the healthcare system that Carmen Maya described, and the lack of access to quality food and exercise, it's a kind of catch as catch can, and we have activists who are constantly fouling, who are in touch with him, but we cannot at this point control his ability to get the care he needs. So I encourage anybody on this call to constantly be reaching out to Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania and DA Krasner in Philly to demand, that he be released. The only way that he can get the care he needs is to be free. And we'll keep repeating that because that's a fact. I want to ask Carmen Maya if you want to do a final statement with the Fidel quote that you mentioned earlier tonight, if you want to do that.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you. I'm gonna do like a little collective brief. I'm gonna start off with Ho Chi Minh. Remember, the storm is a good opportunity for the pine and the cypress to show their strength and their stability. Comandante Fidel said, "What we did yesterday taught us that nothing is impossible. After all, what seemed impossible yesterday was possible today. So nothing will seem impossible tomorrow." And George Jackson said, settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation, understand that fascism is already here, that people are dying who could be saved, that generations more will live poor, butchered half lives if we fail to act. Do what must be done. Discover your humanity and your love in revolution. Thank you all, comrades and community, for joining us today.
Maya, thank you for that. And I want to also encourage, this is Black August coming up starting Sunday. I really want to encourage everybody, if you haven't, to read George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. You know,
Yes.
buy it online if you don't have it. You know, download it if you can't afford it. But take time. It's not that long, but it's a good time of the year and time of in the movement to read it. I want to thank all of our speakers tonight. If you like this discussion, and I'm seeing a lot of positive comments, please join us again. We're live every other Thursday, so we'll be back at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, August 12th. And again, I want to, remind people to donate. I'm waiting for my tech crew to pop that up. We'll see, we have it. Yes, this is how you can donate. And don't be shy. You know, $25 a month is great. If you can make more than that, that is also welcome. And again, I really want to thank everybody who made this program possible tonight. First and foremost, the Disability Justice and Rights Caucus who put this together, our tech crew, Ted and Marcellus and others, and all of the people who prepared their talks, the slideshow. And again, we hope to see you in 2 more weeks. So good night to all. And thanks for everybody's comments. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Brian.
And if you like what you heard, join us.
Yes, thank you.
As great Harvey Milk said, we're here to recruit you. Join the revolution. Join Workers' World Party.
Absolutely. Yeah, join. Apply to join. Okay.
Build the workers' world.